Well, welcome to the Heart of the Black Madonna YouTube channel with me, your host, Stephanie Georgia. At the time of this recording, we are in the beginning of June 2022. It's hard to believe we are in 2022. For some of us, it seems like just a few years ago, we were all in a tizzy about Y2K. My goodness, that was 22 years ago. The last few years, in many ways, have felt like decades, though. And with the increase in the pace of life, one can see why people either tune out completely through various means or cling to the past, because in many ways, it really was a simpler time. For many of us, the current situation in the Ukraine has deeply broken our hearts. There was so much hope way back in the 1990s with the fall of communism, the opening of Eastern Europe, and the increasing connection with Russia and the former states of the Soviet Union. These hopes and the levity of those times were pretty much instantly crushed with the conflict in the former Yugoslavia. I also think the developments in the last several years with Chechnya, Syria, Georgia, Crimea, and now Ukraine seem to be causing further sinking back into the oppression and violence of the days before the collapse of the USSR. What does all of this mean specifically, particularly for those of us who adore the Black Madonna and her symbolism within Christianity? There are so many threads concerning the Black Madonna. I have consistently seen these images as a counter to the prevailing systems, mainstream or oppressive methods of civilization, particularly in the realm of spirit. Regardless of one's Christian affiliation, June is usually the month of Pentecost, also known as Whitsun. Traditionally, this festival is seen as the commemoration of the event recorded in the Acts of the Apostles, where 50 days after the resurrection and the ascension, these events were very confusing to the apostles. But Whitsun, Pentecost, happened where the original 12 apostles were gathered with the Virgin Mary in a room when the Holy Spirit descended upon them. In some understandings of this event, it is seen as the birth of the Holy Spirit. In others, it is seen as the birth of the church. In anthroposophical Christology, Pentecost or Whitsun is seen as a festival of the future and also a festival of the renewal of consciousness. When we review the entire drama of creation up to the Christ event, we come to understand that the resurrection and ascension of the Christ were a significant part of the evolution of the earth and humanity. But with Whitsun, Pentecost, there began the next phase of evolution, where we humans are to be willing and very significant participants in the entire experience of cosmic evolution. We are to be partners in the building of the beloved community, which is to be the vessel of transforming the cosmos of wisdom into the cosmos of love. The Black Madonna has been part of the unfoldment of Christianity since its first centuries, and I see these images as a counterbalance to the rigidification and veering off of the mystical and cosmic intent of the Christ movement on earth. Constantine the Great was no doubt an impressive political leader. He, like all leaders, was a complicated person with many agendas, but mostly his main agenda was to hold on to his power and the power of his idea of a nation state. Constantine was initiated into the Roman mysteries, which were all about seizing taking control of spiritual power, not through earning it. The Roman mysteries were all about forcing the mysteries and not exactly learning from them. He knew, because he had a certain level of clairvoyance, that the Christ mysteries were the appropriate mysteries for the era. But the Christ mysteries were in direct conflict with Roman materialistic and militaristic earthly power. Remember when Christ was being interrogated by Herod? He told him that his kingdom was not of this earth. Mystical Christianity, the movement initiated by Christ, is all about equality on earth. There is no hierarchy. No one is more special in the eyes of divinity. This is in direct opposition to Rome, and Rome did not want such ideas to spread. It got in the way of the slave trade and economic model of the empire. Constantine had enough clairvoyant vision to know that Rome would come to an end and that Christianity was the mystery tradition of the era. In the spirit of, if you can't beat them, join them, and then overtake and morph them to your liking, Constantine put forth the Edict of Milan, the formal toleration of Christianity, but then set forth to Romanize Christianity by introducing the government model of Rome to the organized church, and also the concept behind the formation of the ecumenical councils. These councils, initiated by Constantine, were where dogma was invented. The dogmas, which later were used to violently crush any sort of dissent or differing perspective on what exactly it meant to be a Christian. Rudolf Steiner tells us that many of the Christians during the time of Constantine were actually not very much in favor of what he was doing. Yes, the end of persecutions was nice, but the rest of what he wanted to do eventually stifled much of the original intentions of the Christ movement and the mysteries appropriate to the era. In many ways, the Christ mysteries are beyond our ability to comprehend in terms of the nature and purpose of Christ. But we moderns are much farther along in our understanding than those early century Christians, where it was very confusing trying to understand how a God could become human, be killed, and then rise again. The early centuries of Christianity were filled with many different theories on how to understand the Christ mystery. The Romanization of Christianity meant that not only were the incorrect theories dismissed, but some of the deeply relevant aspects of the Christ mystery were suppressed in the name of earthly power within the hands of the few. When we explore the history of those first centuries, especially between the Eastern and Western churches, something very interesting becomes evident. In the 4th century, the first classic uncertainty in Christian knowledge occurred and was made obvious because of this uncertainty that the primal Christian wisdom was waning. For you religious history buffs, the Arian controversy was the topic of great discussion, arguing whether or not Christ was more God or more man. This really started the split in the church between the East and West. It is of great note that during this time, it was when the Coptic priests came up from North Africa to the European continents and brought their Black Madonnas with them. And this is an Ethiopian church, and it's one of the first and oldest churches in all of Africa. I'm going to read from the book, The Rhythm of the Christian Year by Emil Bach. the chapter entitled Holy Spirit, Healing Spirit. Since we're in the time of Pentecost, I thought this would be a very good time to read this. When in the 9th century, Eastern and Western Christendom split apart, the reason was that East and West could no longer come to an agreement about the nature of the Holy Spirit. It became evident at that time how far the human spirit had moved away from the Holy Spirit. In cases of theological disputes and discussions, it does not make much sense to ask which side is right and which is wrong. The very fact of the controversy shows the uncertainty and the loss of insight on both sides. In the 4th century, the first classic uncertainty in Christian knowledge had come to the fore and made it obvious that the grace-filled sureness of primal Christian wisdom was on the point of extinction. The theologians Arius and Athanasius argued whether Christ was more God or more man. In the 9th century, the uncertainty concerning the Holy Spirit was added to that concerning Christ. The East wanted to cling to the original wording of the creed, the word, and where the Holy Spirit proceeds only from the Father. With the term philokie and from the Son, the West groped for that spirituality which through the Christ event had for the first time entered the world. The East attitude can be explained by the fact that their humanity was rich in ancient spirituality, a spirituality that had been bestowed in ancient paradisical times as divine substance for the earthly journey. Like a dense cloud, a common pre-individual spirit substance hovered there over the souls who were still open to the Spirit. People did not wish to part from this spirit substance because owning to it, one still possessed a profound emotional comprehension for the mysteries of Christianity. Having gone farther on this journey, though, the wasteland impoverishment of the spirit, the West dimly felt that through Christ's incarnation, death, and resurrection, a new spirit font must have opened up, and the gifts of which could benefit humans who were maturing towards selfhood. The nature of the Holy Spirit was quite a biggie in terms of the difficulty between the East and the West, particularly in the 800s. The controversy over what I call the great prepositional phrase kerfuffle, which my Orthodox seminarian former boyfriend of the time did not find my title very cute as we argued dogma. Consequently, as an aside, such arguments led him to find me unfit to be a priest's wife. But I digress. This great prepositional phrase, kerfuffle, called formally the philokie, involved whether or not the Holy Spirit came from the Father or from Christ the Son. In the East, there was still a great affinity for the ancient spirituality from former times. People in the East did not want to part from the spirituality, as it had an emotional comprehension of the mysteries of Christianity. The West, however, felt that through the Christ event, a new orientation towards spirit had opened up, the gifts of which could benefit all as we are collectively maturing towards individual selfhood. This controversy caused a great split between East and West, and the sides abandoned one another. The East had a great connection with the Father, and the West moved on in its own direction. Why am I bringing this up? Because the seeds for the political East-West division that threatens humanity like a nightmare, as we witness daily in the conflict between Ukrainian and Russians, comes from uncertainty concerning the Spirit. I will continue to read from Emil Bach, as he states it much more succinctly than I ever could. In the 9th century, a third uncertainty tragically joined the previous two, namely the uncertainty over the human being. Regarding the question of whether man consists of a body, soul, and spirit, or merely of body and soul, the Eighth Ecumenical Council, which convened in Constantinople, but was conducted by Western theologians in 869, decided against the Trinitarian concept of humanity and denied humanity an individual spirit nature. Through the dogma of 869, the West once more lost what it had groped for in the word philokie. In no individual spirit, if no individual spirit segment belongs to man, how could the new Holy Spirit be brought into the world by Christ, the Son? Despite the word philokie, in favor of which the West had abandoned its connection with the East, the whole of Western culture which includes scientific development, did in fact draw from the decreasing and stream of the old spirit, which originally proceeded from the Father. The Christian impulse did not influence the developing of Western thinking, but moved on in its own direction. The side-by-side developments, which by necessity turned into developments opposing each other, were sanctioned by any number of theories about the necessary separation between faith and knowledge. Unquote. The East still draws from an ancient pre-individualized spirituality, which is directed exclusively to earthly concerns. In the West, and I'm a member of the West, we are more oriented towards individuality and personal freedom. But this orientation has the temptation to move into soulless, materialistic thinking outside of the Christian impulse. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but these are the spiritual origins of the current horrors in Ukraine, which wants to align herself with the West to be an individual free nation, and Russia, who wants Ukraine to essentially cease to be an individual nation and to become one with Russia, rather violently, I might add. This is why Russia is destroying schools, churches, and so on to obliterate Ukrainian culture so it will simply be Russian and not independent when all the violence is over. It is also at the heart of the tragic split between the Ukrainian and Russian Orthodox churches, where the Russian Orthodox Church wants to be in charge of Ukrainian relics, buildings, and the clergy in the Ukraine. And the Ukrainians want to be separate and free from Russian domination of their religious practices. There are several insights on this split, particularly around the Council of Constantinople in 869, also known as the Eighth Ecumenical Council. This council gets quite a bit of attention from anthroposophists in general. However, in mainstream church history, from my perspective, it's given very little attention. What is of particular interest in terms of meaning is that the Orthodox Christians only recognize the first 7 ecumenical councils. The last one, the 7th one, concerning the restoration of icons under the leadership of the Empress Irene. The Orthodox Church has a special Sunday in the liturgical year to commemorate this event, the 7th Ecumenical Council. It always falls on the first Sunday of Lent, the Orthodox Lent. The Orthodox Church does not recognize any council after this. And let me tell you, there were a lot of ecumenical councils after the 7th. There are 21 total ecumenical councils, to be exact. There's a wonderful book called Church in Crisis, which reads like a mystery novel in terms of drama over all of these ecumenical councils. We must also keep in mind that such meetings were started by Constantine to streamline and make Christianity uniform according to Roman standards. These councils are where all sorts of information regarding creeds and accepted doctrine are decided. And this is an icon of the 7th Ecumenical Council, where there is the restoration of the icon. Rudolf Steiner tells us in his Carmel lectures that there was a great meeting in the heavens regarding the best way to foster human independence and freedom regarding its relationship with humanity. It's obvious by personal and historical exploration that freedom and independence are not always fun by any stretch of the imagination. But both freedom and independence are required for humanity to meet its cosmic tasks of unifying with Christ in full freedom and consciousness in order for humanity to transform the cosmos of wisdom into a cosmos of love. So this grand heavenly spiritual meeting took place where great initiates, such as Aristotle, etc., and again, this is on the other side, essentially in heaven, these great initiates gathered to inspire the actions needed on earth to foster and encourage the evolution of human consciousness, freedom, and independence. The 8th Ecumenical Council followed this heavenly meeting of spirit. And at this 8th Ecumenical Council is where the existence of the human spirit was denied. And any school, seminary, philosopher, or theologian teaching about the human spirit was considered heresy and shut down. How is this a good thing, you might say? Personally, I would have liked to have skipped this part of our collective education, but it is striking how completely humanity took this up to be true, this concept of humanity having no spirit. But this concept was necessary to introduce into human evolution so that we would seek spirit on our own. We would acknowledge on our own without someone telling us that we indeed have a spirit and we are individually in charge of our spirits. But after this 8th Ecumenical Council, there was a great schism between humanity and divinity on the whole, and also between the Eastern Church, which rejected such a notion, and the Western Church, which embraced it wholeheartedly. It is of note that the Western Church basically instilled the belief and practice that humanity simply did not have the maturity to deal with spirit, and the church and clergy would hold the secrets and just would inform the populace as needed. The other thing was that the church and the clergy would be in charge of human spirits. This practice was okay with Western humanity until the Reformation, when individuals such as Wycliffe and Luther started to challenge the notion of the church hierarchy holding human spirit, of the church as being in charge of the human divinity relationship. Luther and Wycliffe were translating scriptures into the common language and opening the knowledge about the connection of spirit divinity to all. A side note is this was actually the original intent of the Christ being. One can imagine, and in fact, there were centuries of bloody warfare over this, over the control of humanity's relationship of spirit to spirit. And this was essentially fought between Catholics and Protestants. Back to the Council of 869. What I find intensely interesting is that during the 800s, there were many discoveries of Black Madonnas that had been hidden for centuries. Montserrat, Guadalupe of Extremadura are to name a few. The Black Madonna of Einsiedeln was quite prominent in the 800s. Remember in one of my recent videos and podcasts regarding the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, how the teachings of the Camino were in direct conflict with Rome, how the Templars wanted to create a culture that could contain the Christ. The Templars had been gifted the land surrounding northern Spanish Camino, where numerous Black Madonnas were placed during the age of the Crusades. The Black Madonna as an art form conveys messages from the gods, as do all art forms. The Black Madonna has quite a few specific messages, but one in particular is how the color black is the color of cosmic will being transformed into human will, and points to our role in transforming the cosmos. For me, it is interesting, and I see the Black Madonna coming into prominence during the 9th century as a counter to the prevailing notion of humanity being told that they did not have a spirit. I'm going to read another passage from Emil Bach's book on the Holy Spirit. When in the 9th century the great rift opened between the churches, there existed, far from the outside world, and considered heretical by the church, little known groups around the Holy Grail. Here, profound certainty concerned the Holy Spirit. The stage of the miracle was the innermost center of the human personality. The chalice, the Holy Grail, when it is lifted up, has a healing, nourishing, and inspiring effect represented by the human heart. The miracle that took place inasmuch as the power of Christ's blood came alive in the human blood. Here, the new spirit found streamed. Christendom came into its own in the Pentecostal sense. The tragic fate of the church in the 9th century has turned today in the catastrophic fate of nations and humanity. It is fascinating that the Black Madonna is related to the Grail mysteries, but it is also profound, the origins of the great conflict between East and West that is currently raging out of control in the Ukraine. For many of us, we are simply aghast and heartbroken over the problems. I, for one, love both Ukraine and Russia. the everyday people of each nation. And we all are at a loss of how to deal with the problem. The military and political solutions are many and way beyond my skill set or the capability to influence in any effective measure. But you can work on the spiritual causes of this conflict. We can embrace and heal the wound of separation through prayer and participating in citizen diplomacy. This war will end at some point, and the healing will take a good long while. Many will have died on both sides, and the land and culture of the Ukrainians has been dealt massive blows. But we can help in the healing. We are challenged during this time of Pentecost to become fully conscious in how we think about spirit. We are challenged during this time of Pentecost to create the chalice, the grail of the community of Christians with our hearts, that we all may be one, as was said by Christ in his great farewell discourse in John 17. In verse 21, Christ says that they all may be one, as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. There's been a great movement between the Vatican and different patriarchs of Orthodoxy for a good long while to help ease the wound and bring the faiths together. I've had the privilege of attending some of these meetings, and they are lively and very heartwarming as they are conducted by everyday people wanting to be one. Of course, in many ways, each side sees the other as becoming like them as the key to this healing, but at least they're trying. For us everyday people, we can strive in our hearts and souls to help heal the wound, to build within ourselves and our communities as a beloved community. We can bring together the best of each perspective, treasuring our ancient origins and relationship to the Christ mysteries, but also by developing our own individual consciousness and awareness of the Christ. And that is what I think the Black Madonna is urging us to do, to embrace our freedom, our independence, while recognizing spirit in everything. When we do this, we can transform the cosmos. Thank you for spending your time with me. Blessings on your journey.